The radio crackled to life at 0547 hours, shattering the pre-dawn silence of the Atlanta K9 Unit headquarters. Sarah Collins was already awake, running Max through his morning drills in the training yard behind the building. The Belgian Malinois moved with fluid precision, his black and tan coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights as he navigated the obstacle course with practiced ease. Unit K97, this is dispatch. Urgent message from headquarters. Report to Captain Morrison's office immediately. Priority Alpha. Sarah's hand froze on the stopwatch. Priority Alpha. In 6 years of service, she'd received that designation exactly 3 times, once for a multi-state drug trafficking ring, once for a potential terror threat at the airport, and once when a senator's daughter had been kidnapped. Her pulse quickened as she clipped the radio back to her belt. "Max, higher!" she commanded, her voice sharp and clear. The dog's ears perked up instantly, and he abandoned the obstacle course, trotting to her side with his tongue, lolling happily. But Sarah noticed something in his demeanor, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a slightly raised hackle along his spine. Max sensed her anxiety, as he always did. They'd been partners long enough that emotions flowed between them like electric current. Sarah knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur, feeling the powerful muscles beneath. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "Let's see what this is about." The walk to Captain Morrison's office felt longer than usual. The hallways of the precinct were unusually quiet for a weekday morning. Most of the night shift had already clocked out, and the day shift hadn't yet arrived in full force. Their footsteps echoed against the linoleum floors, Sarah's tactical boots making sharp clicks, Max's claws creating a softer counterpoint. Captain James Morrison was standing by his window when Sarah knocked and entered. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with iron-grey hair cut military short and a face that had seen too many hard cases. But this morning, something was different. His jaw was tight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. "Collins, close the door." Sarah obeyed, her instincts screaming that whatever was coming was big. Max sat at her heel, his dark eyes fixed on the captain with unwavering focus. Morrison turned from the window, his expression grave. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement before you leave this office, and you will not discuss this mission with anyone. Not your colleagues, not your family, not even other officers in this department. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her throat suddenly dry. The captain moved to his desk and pulled out a manila folder stamped with red letters, "Top Secret." He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied Sarah's face, as if weighing something in his mind. "How's Max performing?" The question caught her off guard. "Sir, Max is at peak performance. He's successfully completed 47 operations this year with a 100% detection rate. His tracking abilities—" Morrison raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not questioning his record, Collins. I'm asking about his instincts, his intuition." Sarah frowned slightly. It was an odd question, but she answered honestly. "Max has never been wrong, sir. Not once. If he alerts on something, there's something there, period." The captain nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what he'd hoped to hear. He finally opened the folder, revealing a series of photographs and documents that Sarah couldn't quite make out from where she stood. 3 hours ago, I received a call from the Secret Service. They have a situation that requires the best K9 team we have. That's you and Max." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest. The Secret Service. This was no ordinary operation. Morrison continued, his voice lowering. "There's an emergency meeting scheduled at the White House. CIA leadership, National Security Council, and the President himself. The meeting was called with less than 12 hours' notice, which is highly unusual for something of this magnitude. The Secret Service wants additional security screening, specifically K9 detection." "They have their own K9 units, sir," Sarah said carefully. "Why request us?" "Because this isn't a standard sweep. They need someone from outside the federal system, someone they can trust who doesn't have existing relationships with the attendees." Someone whose dog can't be compromised or influenced. Morrison's eyes locked onto hers. The Secret Service has intelligence suggesting a potential insider threat. They don't know who, they don't know what, but they need fresh eyes, or in this case, a fresh nose. The weight of his words settled over the room like a physical presence. An insider threat at a meeting with the president. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. "What's the threat assessment?" she asked. "Unknown. Could be explosives, could be biological agents, could be surveillance equipment. They're not taking any chances." Morrison slid the folder across the desk. "You'll fly out of Hartsfield-Jackson at 800 hours. That gives you 2 hours to review the briefing materials, pack your gear, and get to the airport. A government jet is waiting." Sarah picked up the folder, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside were photographs of the White House grounds, floor plans of the West Wing, and profiles of the meeting attendees. She recognized several faces: the director of the CIA, the National Security Advisor, several high-ranking military officials. These were some of the most powerful people in the country. "Sir, with all respect, this is beyond our usual scope. We're talking about presidential security. Shouldn't this be—" "The Secret Service specifically requested you," Morrison interrupted. "They reviewed files on every K-9 unit in the Southeast. Your record with Max stood out. 47 successful operations, 0 false positives, 0 missed detections. They need that reliability." Sarah looked down at Max, who sat perfectly still, watching her with those intelligent dark eyes. He cocked his head slightly, as if sensing the magnitude of what was being discussed. "There's something else," Morrison said quietly. "The nature of the meeting itself is classified, but I've been told it involves an imminent threat to national security. Whatever they're discussing in that room could determine the course of action for the entire country. They need to know that room is clean, that everyone in it can be trusted. That's where you come in." Sarah's mouth felt dry. She'd handled high-pressure situations before, but this was different. This wasn't Atlanta. This wasn't even Georgia. This was the White House, the President of the United States. "When do we leave?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your transport is waiting at the K-9 unit vehicle bay. They'll take you and Max to the airport. You'll be briefed in more detail on the flight." Morrison extended his hand. "Collins, I wouldn't have recommended you if I didn't believe you and Max were capable of this. Trust your training. Trust your partner." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "We won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "And Collins, watch your back. If there really is an insider threat at that level, you're walking into a situation where you won't know who to trust. The only one you can rely on completely is Max." The words sent a chill down her spine. 30 minutes later, Sarah was in the locker room, packing her tactical gear into a duffel bag. Her hands moved automatically: spare magazine pouches, tactical gloves, emergency medical kit, Max's backup harness and leash. She'd done this hundreds of times, but never had the stakes felt this high. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Lunch this weekend?" Sarah stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She couldn't tell her sister where she was going, couldn't tell anyone. She typed a quick response. "Can't this weekend. Work thing." "Rain check?" The lie felt heavy, but necessary. She changed into her formal uniform, the crisp dark blue of the Atlanta PD, her silver badge polished to a mirror shine. She braided her brown hair into a tight bun, then checked her appearance in the mirror. She looked professional, capable. She needed to look that way. First impressions mattered, especially when dealing with the Secret Service. Max waited patiently by the door, his tactical harness already in place. The black vest bore his badge number and had attachment points for his camera and tracking equipment. He looked every inch the professional working dog he was. "Ready, partner?" Sarah asked, shouldering her bag. Max's tail wagged once, firmly. That was his version of yes. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was surreal. The streets of Atlanta were just beginning to wake up, early morning traffic starting to build on the highways. Sarah sat in the back of the unmarked SUV, Max beside her, while two federal agents she didn't know occupied the front seats. Neither spoke to her, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the early hour. The vehicle bypassed the main terminals, heading instead to a restricted area on the north side of the airport. Sarah had worked security here before, but never in this section. This was where government aircraft came and went, away from public eyes. A sleek Gulfstream jet sat on the tarmac, its engines already warming up. Two figures in dark suits stood at the base of the stairs, Secret Service, judging by their bearing and the telltale earpieces. The SUV stopped, and one of the agents opened Sarah's door. "Officer Collins, if you'll follow me." She grabbed her gear and stepped out, Max heeling perfectly at her left side. The morning air was humid and warm, typical for Atlanta in early fall. As they approached the aircraft, one of the Secret Service agents stepped forward. "Officer Collins, I'm Special Agent Marcus Reed, Secret Service. This is Agent Linda Torres. We'll be accompanying you to Washington." Reed was tall and solidly built, probably in his early 40s, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Torres was shorter, athletic, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, similar to Sarah's own. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Torres said, her voice professional but not unfriendly. "We know this is unusual." "Just doing my job, ma'am," Sarah replied. Reed's eyes dropped to Max. "This is the dog?" "This is Max, yes, sir." Reed crouched down slowly, extending a hand for Max to sniff. The dog's nose twitched, processing the hundreds of scent molecules, cataloging this new person. After a moment, Max's tail wagged slightly. His sign of acceptance. "Beautiful animal," Reed said, standing. "I've read his file, impressive record." "He's the best," Sarah said simply. "He'll need to be," Torres said quietly. "Shall we board?" The interior of the Gulfstream was nothing like the military transport Sarah had occasionally flown in during joint operations. This was luxury, cream leather seats, polished wood trim, a conference table in the rear. But Sarah barely noticed. Her mind was already racing ahead to the mission. Once they were airborne and the seatbelt sign switched off, Reed opened a briefcase and pulled out an iPad. "Let's brief you on what you're walking into." For the next hour, Sarah absorbed information at a pace that made her head spin. The meeting at the White House involved a threat assessment related to a terrorist organization known as the Network, a sophisticated, well-funded group that had been operating in the shadows for years. Recent intelligence suggested they had infiltrated government agencies, possibly at high levels. "We don't know who," Torres explained, swiping through photos of the meeting attendees. "We don't know how deep it goes. But 3 days ago, NSA intercepted encrypted communications that mentioned Washington and the highest level. That's all we have." Sarah studied the faces on the screen. Director of the CIA, William Hartley. Deputy Director James Kellerman. National Security Advisor Patricia Chen. Secretary of Defense. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. These were people who shaped national policy, who had access to the country's deepest secrets. "What's my specific role?" Sarah asked. "You and Max will conduct a security sweep before the meeting begins," Reed said. "Standard procedure, check for explosives, biological agents, electronic surveillance devices. But you'll also be sweeping the attendees themselves." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "You want me to have Max check the people in the meeting?" "Discreetly," Torres emphasized. "As they arrive, Max will be in the hallway. He'll scent each person as they pass. If he alerts on anyone or anything, you signal us immediately." "Max is trained to detect explosives and narcotics," Sarah said carefully. "If someone's carrying something else." "The network uses a specific chemical compound in their encrypted communication devices," Reed interrupted. "It's a residue that transfers to skin and clothing. We've arranged for Max to be familiarized with the scent before you enter the White House." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. They were asking Max to detect something he'd never been trained on, in one of the most high-pressure environments imaginable, surrounded by the most powerful people in the country. "How reliable is this scent detection?" she asked. In lab conditions, dogs trained specifically for this compound have an 85% success rate, Torres said. Max isn't trained for this specific compound. No, but his detection capabilities are exceptional, and we don't have time to bring in a dog who is trained for it. The meeting is in 6 hours. Sarah looked down at Max, who had settled on the floor beside her seat, his head resting on his paws. But his eyes were open, alert, watching the conversation, even if he couldn't understand the words. "If Max alerts, what happens?" Sarah asked. Reed and Torres exchanged a glance. "That depends on who he alerts on," Reed said finally. "If it's a staff member, we detain them immediately. If it's one of the principals, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it," Torres cut in. "Your job is detection. We'll handle the rest." The rest of the flight passed in a blur of additional briefings, security protocols, and contingency plans. Sarah's mind was spinning by the time they began their descent into Joint Base Andrews outside Washington. A motorcade was waiting on the tarmac, 3 black SUVs with tinted windows. Sarah and Max were ushered into the middle vehicle, Reed and Torres flanking them. As they drove toward the Capitol, Sarah stared out the window at the passing landscape. The Washington Monument rose in the distance, the Capitol dome gleaming in the morning sun. She'd never been to D.C. before, never imagined her first visit would be like this. "Nervous?" Torres asked quietly. Sarah considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, ma'am." Torres smiled slightly. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously. Just remember, you and Max are there to do a job. Do it the same way you would in Atlanta. Trust your training. Trust your partner." The same words Captain Morrison had used. The motorcade turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue, and Sarah's breath caught as the White House came into view. Even knowing where she was going, the reality of it hit her like a physical force. The iconic white columns, the carefully manicured lawn, the armed guards at every entrance. They entered through a side gate, away from the public areas. Security was immediately visible. Uniformed Secret Service officers, K-9 teams, armed response units. Sarah spotted at least 3 sniper positions on the roof. Inside, the White House was simultaneously grand and intimate. High ceilings, historical paintings, the weight of centuries of history pressing down from every wall. Sarah felt profoundly out of place in her Atlanta PD uniform. A severe-looking woman in a dark suit approached. "Officer Collins, I'm Chief of Security Margaret Dawson. Follow me, please." They were led through a maze of corridors to a small room near the West Wing. Inside was a stainless steel case, which Dawson opened to reveal several sealed vials. "These contain trace amounts of the chemical compound we discussed," Dawson said. "You'll expose your dog to the scent now. He needs to be able to identify it in approximately 90 minutes. Sarah knelt beside Max, who had been watching everything with intense focus. She could feel the tension in his body, the barely contained energy. He knew something important was happening. "Max, higher," she commanded softly. "Pay attention, boy. This is important." She opened the first vial, holding it carefully beneath Max's nose. The dog sniffed deeply, his nostrils flaring. Once, twice, 3 times. Sarah watched his eyes, seeing the moment the scent registered in his incredible brain. "Good boy," she murmured. "Remember that. Sushin. Search." The command that meant everything to Max. They repeated the process with the other vials, reinforcing the scent memory. By the end, Sarah was confident Max would recognize it. The question was whether he'd detect it in the chaos of a high-level security sweep with dozens of people and 1,000 competing scents. "The meeting is scheduled for 1100 hours, Dawson said, checking her watch. "You'll begin your sweep at 10:30. The attendees will start arriving at 10:45. You'll be positioned in the corridor outside the Situation Room. Any questions?" Sarah had about 1,000, but none that would help right now. "No, ma'am." "Then I suggest you and your partner get some rest. It's going to be a long day." But rest was impossible. Sarah's mind wouldn't stop racing, running through scenarios, contingencies, everything that could go wrong. Max sensed her anxiety and pressed against her leg, offering the comfort he always did. At 10:25 hours, Sarah and Max were escorted to the West Wing. The corridors were bustling with staff, phones ringing, the controlled chaos of the world's most powerful office. Everyone who passed looked stressed, focused. The hallway outside the Situation Room was quieter, more secure. 2 Secret Service agents stood at the door, their faces impassive. Sarah took her position 20 feet away, Max sitting at her heel. "Remember," Reed said quietly, standing nearby. "Natural behavior. Let Max do his job." Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. At exactly 10:45, the first attendee arrived. The first person to arrive was National Security Advisor Patricia Chen, a petite woman in her early 50s with steel-grey hair cut in a sharp bob. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had navigated these halls for decades, her heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor. Sarah stood at attention as Chen approached, Max sitting perfectly still beside her. The advisor's eyes flicked to the dog, then to Sarah, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement before continuing toward the Situation Room entrance. As she passed, Sarah gave Max the subtle hand signal they'd practiced thousands of times. Max's nose lifted slightly, his nostrils flaring as he processed the scent trail Chen left in her wake. Perfume, coffee, paper, ink, fabric softener, and nothing else. After 2 seconds, Max relaxed marginally, his signal that everything was clear. Sarah felt a small measure of relief, one down. Over the next 15 minutes, they arrived in steady succession. Secretary of Defense James Whitmore, a barrel-chested man who walked like the Marine he'd once been, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Admiral Richardson, whose uniform was so perfectly pressed it could have cut glass. Deputy National Security Advisor Kevin Marsh, younger than the others, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better days. Max cleared each one. His nose worked methodically, processing thousands of scent molecules with each passing figure, comparing them against the chemical signature burned into his memory just an hour earlier. Sarah watched him with the intensity of someone reading a foreign language, interpreting every twitch of his ears, every shift in his posture. Then Director of the CIA William Hartley arrived. Hartley was exactly what Sarah expected a CIA director to look like. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, moving with the calm authority of someone who held secrets that could topple governments. 2 aides flanked him, both young and severe-looking, carrying encrypted tablets. Max's attention sharpened. His ears pricked forward, and Sarah felt him tense slightly beneath her hand. She held her breath, waiting, but after a moment, Max settled again. Clear. The aides passed next. Clear. Clear. Sarah was beginning to think this entire operation might be a false alarm, an abundance of caution for a threat that didn't exist. Maybe the network's communications had been about something else entirely. Maybe Deputy Director James Kellerman appeared at the end of the corridor. Sarah had studied his file on the flight. Kellerman was 53, a 25-year veteran of the CIA who had worked his way up from field operative to one of the most powerful positions in the intelligence community. He had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and unfailingly loyal. 3 presidents had relied on his counsel. He was, by every account, a patriot. He walked alone, no aides, no security detail. His suit was dark blue, conservative, his tie a muted red. Reading glasses hung from a chain around his neck. He carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm and moved with the slight stiffness of someone who spent too many hours behind a desk. As Kellerman approached, Sarah noticed something odd. Max had gone completely still, not relaxed, rigid. Every muscle in the dog's powerful body had locked into place, and his eyes had fixed on Kellerman with an intensity that made Sarah's pulse spike. "Easy," she whispered, her hand tightening on his lead. Kellerman was 10 feet away, 8 feet, 6 feet, Max's nostrils flared wide, working overtime, his head tilted slightly, tracking Kellerman's movement with laser focus. Sarah saw the moment it happened, the instant Max's brain registered the scent he'd been trained to detect. The chemical signature of the network. The dog's entire body tensed like a coiled spring. His hackles rose along his spine, and a low, almost inaudible whine emerged from his throat. It wasn't aggressive, it was his alert signal, the sound he made when he'd found what he was looking for. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed that Max was right. He was never wrong. But this was Deputy Director Kellerman, a man who had dedicated his life to protecting this country, a man who sat in the Oval Office and advised presidents. Kellerman passed them without a glance, his face composed and professional. But Max's head swiveled to follow him, his nose still working, his body vibrating with barely contained focus. "Max, fuss," Sarah commanded quietly, telling him to heel. But Max didn't obey immediately, a first in their 6 years together. His eyes remained locked on Kellerman's retreating back as the deputy director approached the Situation Room entrance. Sarah's mind raced. Protocol dictated that she signal Reed immediately. But what if Max was wrong? What if there was a contamination issue, or the scent had transferred from something innocent? Accusing Kellerman, deputy director of the CIA, of being connected to a terrorist organization based solely on a dog's reaction would end her career and possibly trigger an international incident if Max had somehow made a mistake. But Max never made mistakes. Agent Reed had moved closer, his eyes questioning. He'd noticed Max's behavior. Sarah's hand trembled as she gave the subtle signal they'd agreed upon, a closed fist held at chest level, alert. Reed's expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten. He touched his earpiece, speaking in a voice too low for Sarah to hear. Torres materialized from somewhere, her face carefully neutral. Kellerman had reached the entrance to the Situation Room. One of the Secret Service agents was checking his credentials. A routine procedure everyone had to go through regardless of rank. "Officer Collins," Torres said quietly, appearing at Sarah's elbow. "Are you certain?" Sarah looked down at Max. The dog was trembling now, not with fear, but with the overwhelming drive to alert more forcefully, to do his job completely. His training warred with his discipline, the need to signal versus the command to remain calm. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Max detected the compound. Torres's eyes hardened. She touched her earpiece again, speaking rapidly. "We have an alert. Subject is Deputy Director Kellerman. I repeat, we have an alert on Kellerman." Time seemed to slow down. Sarah watched as more Secret Service agents appeared, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who trained for situations exactly like this. Kellerman had entered the Situation Room, but 2 agents followed him in, while others took positions outside the door. Chief of Security Dawson strode down the corridor, her face like granite. "Bring the dog," she commanded. Sarah's legs felt weak as she followed Dawson, Max healing perfectly now, his mission partially complete. They were led into an adjacent room, a small office that had been converted into a temporary command center. Multiple screens showed different angles of the Situation Room, where meeting attendees were taking their seats around a massive conference table. "Show me exactly what happened," Dawson demanded. Sarah recounted the sequence, her voice professional despite her racing heart. Max alerted on Deputy Director Kellerman at approximately 10:52 hours. The alert was definitive, elevated attention, physical tension, and his verbal signal. "He's trained to detect the specific chemical compound you briefed us on, and he identified it on Kellerman." "Could there be a false positive?" Dawson asked. "Contamination? Transfer from another source?" "Possible, but unlikely," Sarah said. Max differentiated between all the other attendees. If there was environmental contamination, he would have alerted on others as well. And on the screens, they could see Kellerman taking his seat near the head of the table, 2 chairs away from where the president would sit. He was chatting casually with Admiral Richardson, his body language relaxed and open. Nothing in his demeanor suggested anything was wrong. Reed entered the command center, his face grave. The president has been delayed by 15 minutes. We're calling it a scheduling conflict, but it gives us time to assess. What do you want to do? Torres asked Dawson. The chief of security stared at the screens, her fingers drumming against the desk. Sarah could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Kellerman was one of the most powerful intelligence officials in the country. Accusing him without solid evidence could trigger a political earthquake. But if Max was right, and they did nothing— "We need more than a dog's alert," Dawson said finally. "Officer Collins, is there any way to increase certainty?" Sarah's mind worked quickly. Max could perform a closer inspection. If Kellerman has had direct contact with the compound, handling communication devices, for example, the scent concentration would be strongest on his hands and clothing. How close would Max need to be? Within 3 feet, ideally less. Dawson shook her head. "We can't bring a dog into the situation room without cause. It would alert everyone that something's wrong. What if we call a security hold?" Reed suggested. "Tell them we detected an anomaly during the sweep. Need to recheck everyone before the president arrives." Torres nodded slowly. "That could work. It's unusual, but not unprecedented." Dawson considered for a moment, then made her decision. "Do it, but keep it contained. I don't want panic." 5 minutes later, the attendees were asked to step back into the hallway for a brief, additional security screening. The announcement was made calmly, professionally, but Sarah saw the flash of annoyance on several faces. These were busy, important people who didn't appreciate delays. They filed out one by one, forming a loose group near the Situation Room entrance. Sarah stood with Max 20 feet away, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "We'll have Max do a secondary sweep of everyone," Reed announced to the group. "Standard procedure when meetings include this level of leadership. Please remain in place." Kellerman stood near the back of the group, his expression mildly curious but not concerned. He'd left his portfolio inside the Situation Room. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed. "Max, Befus," Sarah commanded, moving forward. "Heel." They approached Patricia Chen first, going through the motions of a routine sweep. Max sniffed carefully, then moved on. Secretary Whitmore, clear. Admiral Richardson, clear. Each person received the same treatment, Max working methodically, his nose processing incredible amounts of information with each breath. Sarah kept her movements professional, her face neutral, but inside she was screaming with tension. They were 3 people away from Kellerman. 2 people, 1 person. Then it was Kellerman's turn. "Deputy Director," Sarah said politely, "if you could just remain still for a moment." "Of course," Kellerman replied, his voice smooth and cultured. He smiled slightly. "Impressive dog you have there, officer." "Thank you, sir." Sarah gave Max the signal. The dog moved forward, his nose lifting toward Kellerman's torso, his nostrils working. 1 second, 2 seconds. Max's entire body went rigid. His hackles stood up like a ridge of black and brown fur along his spine. The whine came again, louder this time, impossible to miss. His front paws danced with agitation, and he strained forward against Sarah's lead, trying to get closer to Kellerman. Then Max did something he'd never done before in 6 years of service. He barked, one sharp, piercing bark that echoed off the corridor walls like a gunshot. The hallway exploded into chaos. Secret Service agents moved instantly, their training overriding everything else. 2 grabbed Kellerman's arms, while another stepped between him and the rest of the group. The other attendees backed away, faces showing shock and confusion. "What is this?" Kellerman demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. "What's going on?" "Sir, please remain calm," one of the agents said firmly. "We need to conduct a more thorough security check." "This is absurd," Kellerman's voice rose. "I've been through security screening countless times. That dog is clearly malfunctioning." "Max doesn't malfunction," Sarah said quietly, but with absolute certainty. Kellerman's eyes snapped to her, and for just an instant, less than a second, she saw something flash across his face. Not confusion or indignation, but calculation. the look of someone rapidly reassessing a situation that had gone unexpectedly wrong. Then it was gone, replaced by offended dignity. "I demand to know what this dog allegedly detected." Dawson had arrived, flanked by more agents. "Deputy Director Kellerman, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. This is standard protocol for any security alert." "Director Hartley," Kellerman called out, turning to his superior, "this is ridiculous. Tell them." But Hartley's face was unreadable, his eyes cold. "James, cooperate with the Secret Service. If there's been a mistake, we'll sort it out quickly." Kellerman's face flushed red. "Bill, you know me. 25 years. Then you have nothing to worry about," Hartley said flatly. Sarah watched as Kellerman was escorted away, flanked by 4 agents. He went without physical resistance, but his protests echoed down the corridor until they turned a corner and disappeared. Max was still agitated, whining and pawing at the floor. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hands through his fur. "Good boy," she whispered fiercely. "Such a good boy." "You did your job." The dog's tail wagged once, but his eyes remained fixed on the direction Kellerman had gone. Torres approached, her expression grim. "Officer Collins, Chief Dawson wants you and Max standing by. Depending on what we find, we may need additional detection work." "Yes, ma'am." The other attendees were being ushered back into the Situation Room, though Sarah could hear the rapid, tense conversations. Word would spread quickly. Deputy Director of the CIA detained on suspicion of what? No one had said it out loud yet. No one wanted to. Sarah was led to a different waiting room, this one with a window overlooking the rose garden. Max settled on the floor beside her chair, his head resting on her knee. They'd done their job. They'd detected the threat, but Sarah's mind wouldn't stop racing. What if they were wrong? What if Max had somehow been mistaken, or the scent had transferred innocently? Kellerman's career would be destroyed. The diplomatic fallout would be enormous. And Sarah? No. She pushed the thought away. Max was never wrong. In 6 years, 47 operations, not once had he alerted falsely. She had to trust that. 30 minutes crawled by, then 45. Sarah's legs bounced with nervous energy, while Max remained calm, conserving his strength with the wisdom of an experienced working dog. Finally, the door opened. Reed stepped in, and Sarah jumped to her feet, reading his expression desperately. "We found something," Reed said quietly. Sarah's breath caught. "What?" Kellerman had a device concealed in his pen, a transmitter using the exact chemical compound Max was trained to detect. It's sophisticated, barely larger than a rice grain, but it's there. He was prepared to transmit data from inside the Situation Room. The world seemed to tilt. Sarah's legs went weak, and she grabbed the back of the chair for support. Max had been right. Max had detected a threat that would have compromised one of the most secure meetings in the country. "Is he talking?" Sarah asked. Reed's expression darkened. "He's denying everything. Claims the device was planted, that he's being framed. But we're finding other evidence. Encrypted files on his home computer, financial transactions to shell companies with known links to the network." "Dear God," Sarah whispered. "It gets worse," Reed continued. "Initial forensics suggest he's not working alone. There are references to other assets, other compromised individuals. We may have just exposed the tip of something much larger." Sarah looked down at Max, who gazed back up at her with those intelligent, trusting eyes. He'd done something extraordinary today, something that might have changed the course of history. "The President wants to meet you both," Reed said. "Before the meeting, the one that will actually happen now. He wants to thank you personally." Sarah's mouth went dry. "The President? You and Max just saved this meeting, Officer Collins. Possibly saved much more than that. The President understands what that means." 10 minutes later, Sarah found herself standing in the Oval Office, Max at her side. The room was smaller than she'd imagined, more intimate, though the weight of history pressed down from every direction. President Richard Morrison entered through a side door, a tall man in his early 60s with grey hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He moved with the controlled energy of someone who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Officer Collins," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes sincere. "Thank you for your service today. What you and Max did—" He shook his head. "I'm told that device could have transmitted classified information about our response to the network. Information that would have cost American lives." "Just doing our job, Mr. President," Sarah managed, her voice surprisingly steady. The president knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with Max. "And who's this brave guy?" "This is Max, sir." The president extended his hand slowly, letting Max sniff. The dog's tail wagged, accepting this new person into his circle of trust. "He's never wrong." "I understand," the president said, looking up at Sarah. "No, sir, not once." "Then I'm glad he was here today." The president stood, his expression grave. "Officer Collins, what happened today is classified at the highest level. You can't discuss it with anyone. But I want you to know, your country owes you and Max a debt it can never fully repay." Sarah swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mr. President." As they were escorted out, Sarah's mind spun. Kellerman had been in that room dozens of times. How much had he already transmitted? How much damage had been done? And if there were others? Max pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. She looked down at him, this incredible animal who had just exposed a traitor at the highest levels of government. His eyes were calm, trusting, waiting for the next command. "Come on, partner," she whispered. "Something tells me our job here isn't finished." She had no idea how right she was. The interrogation room was sterile and cold, designed to be deliberately uncomfortable. Sarah watched through one-way glass as Deputy Director James Kellerman sat at a metal table, his hands cuffed in front of him, his formerly impeccable suit rumpled and creased. Two FBI counterintelligence agents sat across from him, their expressions hard and unforgiving. "I'm telling you, this is a mistake," Kellerman said, for what had to be the 20th time. His voice had lost its earlier authority, now carrying an edge of desperation. 25 years of service, 25 years of loyalty, and you're going to believe a dog over me? Special Agent Reed stood beside Sarah, his arms crossed as he studied Kellerman through the glass. "He's good," Reed murmured. "I'll give him that. If we didn't have physical evidence, I might almost believe him." "What exactly did you find?" Sarah asked, her eyes never leaving Kellerman. "The transmitter in his pen is a masterpiece of engineering. Chinese-made, according to preliminary analysis, but modified with components that trace back to Eastern Europe. It uses a frequency that conventional sweeps wouldn't detect. Without Max," Reed shook his head, "we never would have found it." On Kellerman's home computer, forensic analysts had discovered encrypted files containing classified CIA operations, intelligence assessments, and strategic analyses. All information that could devastate American interests if it fell into the wrong hands. The encryption was sophisticated, but the NSA's best cryptographers were working to crack it. "Bank records show regular deposits to offshore accounts," Reed continued. "Small amounts, carefully structured to avoid triggering automatic alerts. Over 5 years, it totals nearly $2 million. Sarah felt sick. 5 years? At least. Maybe longer. We're still digging. In the interrogation room, one of the FBI agents slid a photograph across the table. Sarah couldn't see what it depicted, but she saw Kellerman's face go pale, his composure finally cracking. "Where did you get that?" Kellerman whispered. "Answer the question, Deputy Director." "Who is this man?" Kellerman's jaw worked, his eyes darting between the agents. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get your lawyer, but right now, I want you to understand something." The FBI agent leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We have you dead to rights on espionage charges. The transmitter, the files, the money, that's life in federal prison minimum. But if there are others, if this conspiracy goes deeper and you help us find them, that's the only thing that might save you from a death sentence for treason." The word hung in the air like a blade. Treason. Sarah had never seen the charge applied to someone at this level. Spies and foreign agents, yes, but a deputy director of the CIA? Kellerman's hands trembled. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I need time to think." You don't have time, the second agent snapped. Every minute you stall, your co-conspirators are covering their tracks. Help us now, or spend the rest of your life in a supermax cell. Sarah turned away from the window, unable to watch anymore. Max sat at her feet, calm and patient as always, but she could see the alertness in his eyes. He sensed her agitation. Chief Dawson entered the observation room, her face carved from stone. "Officer Collins, I need Max to perform another sweep." Sarah's head snapped up. "Ma'am?" Kellerman had access to dozens of offices and secure facilities. We need to know if he planted surveillance devices or if anyone else he met with is carrying that chemical signature. Dawson's eyes were hard. You and Max are the only ones who can detect it, the only ones we can trust completely. Trust. Such a heavy word in this building right now. Sarah could see the paranoia already taking root. If Kellerman had been compromised, who else might be? How deep did the network's infiltration go? "Where do you want us to start?" Sarah asked. "Kellerman's office. Then we'll move to the offices of everyone he's had recent contact with." The CIA headquarters building was a fortress of concrete and glass in Langley, Virginia. Sarah and Max arrived via helicopter, touching down on a secure pad as the sun began to set over the Potomac. The building loomed before them, housing some of the nation's deepest secrets and apparently its deepest betrayals. Inside, the corridors were bustling with activity despite the late hour. Word of Kellerman's arrest had spread, not the details, but enough to trigger a massive internal security review. Agents moved with grim purpose. Computers were being seized, files were being secured. Sarah felt eyes on her and Max as they walked. Some looked curious, others resentful. She was an outsider here, a local cop from Atlanta, and she'd just taken down one of their own. She kept her head high, her hand steady on Max's lead. Kellerman's office was on the 4th floor, a corner suite with windows overlooking the Virginia countryside. It had already been searched once, but Dawson wanted Max's nose on everything. "Take your time," Dawson instructed. "If Max alerts on anything, we bag it for analysis." Sarah nodded and gave Max the command. "Suchin." The dog's nose went to work immediately, processing the layered scents of the room. Kellerman's cologne, coffee, paper, electronic equipment, cleaning supplies, dozens of visitors who had passed through. All of it registered in Max's extraordinary olfactory system. Max moved methodically, checking the desk first, then the filing cabinets, the bookshelf, the chairs. Sarah watched him with the intensity of someone reading a complex text, interpreting every movement, every pause. At the desk, Max's attention sharpened. His nose worked along the edge of the desk drawer, then moved to the underside of the desktop itself. He sat down abruptly, his signal for a strong detection. "Here," Sarah said, pointing. A forensic team moved in, carefully examining where Max had indicated. Using specialized equipment, they found it, a miniature recording device no larger than a button, adhered to the underside of the desk with an adhesive that matched the wood grain perfectly. "How long has this been here?" Dawson demanded. The forensic tech examined it with a magnifying glass. "Based on the dust accumulation around it, weeks at minimum, maybe months. Can we pull data from it?" "It's not storing data, it's transmitting. Or was transmitting until we activated the signal jammers. We'll need to trace where the transmission was going." Sarah felt a chill. If Kellerman had been under surveillance himself, it meant either he was being monitored by the network to ensure his loyalty, or someone else had suspected him and planted the device. Either scenario was deeply troubling. They continued the sweep. Max found 2 more recording devices, one in an air vent, another behind a picture frame. Each discovery tightened the knot in Sarah's stomach. "Who else had access to this office?" Sarah asked. "Dozens of people," Dawson replied grimly. "Staff, cleaning crews, other agents. We're pulling security footage now, but whoever planted these knew what they were doing." The sweep of Kellerman's office took 2 hours. By the time they finished, Sarah's legs ached and Max was panting slightly, his tongue lolling. The mental exertion of scent detection was exhausting for working dogs, even one as well trained as Max. "Good boy," Sarah murmured, giving him water from a collapsible bowl. "You're doing so good." Max lapped the water gratefully, then pressed his head against her leg. Even in the midst of this chaos, their bond remained the one constant she could rely on. "We need to check 6 more offices tonight," Dawson said, consulting a list on her tablet. "Priority targets, everyone Kellerman worked closely with." It was going to be a long night. The next office belonged to senior analyst Rebecca Chen, a 35-year-old specialist in Middle Eastern terrorism. Her workspace was smaller, more cluttered, with photographs of family on the desk and a coffee mug that proclaimed, "World's okayest analyst." Max alerted almost immediately, his nose fixing on a laptop bag hanging from a coat hook. Sarah's heart sank as forensic techs carefully examined the bag, finding residue of the chemical compound on the exterior fabric. "Agent Chen is currently in the building," one of Dawson's assistants reported. "Should we detain her?" "Bring her in for questioning. Carefully. I don't want to spook anyone else who might be involved." They moved to the next office, then the next. Max found traces of the compound in 3 out of 6 locations. Not devices this time, but residue, evidence that someone carrying the network's equipment had been present. By midnight, Sarah was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline. Max was flagging too, though he never complained, never stopped working. They'd identified 7 potential compromised individuals based on Max's detections, and the scope of the conspiracy was becoming horrifyingly clear. In a secure conference room, Dawson assembled a task force: FBI, CIA counterintelligence, NSA analysts. Sarah sat at the table, feeling profoundly out of place among these federal agents and intelligence professionals. Max lay at her feet, finally resting. "Let's talk about what we know," Dawson began, pulling up a digital chart on the large screen. "Kellerman is confirmed compromised. We've identified 6 others who had contact with chemical signatures linked to the network. We found 4 surveillance devices in Kellerman's office alone." "Have any of the suspects talked?" asked an FBI agent Sarah didn't recognize. "Rebecca Chen is claiming ignorance, says she met with a source 2 days ago who could have transferred the residue. We're checking her story. The others are lawyering up." A CIA counterintelligence officer spoke up. "What's the network's objective here? If they've penetrated this deeply, what are they planning?" "That's what we need to find out," Dawson replied. "But according to the initial decryption of Kellerman's files, they've been gathering intelligence on our defensive capabilities, our response protocols, our critical infrastructure vulnerabilities." "They're planning an attack," someone said quietly. "Multiple attacks," Dawson corrected, "coordinated, designed to overwhelm our response capabilities." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just espionage. It was preparation for war. "When?" Sarah heard herself ask. All eyes turned to her. Dawson's expression was grim. "According to the file metadata, Kellerman was supposed to transmit final intelligence from today's meeting. The attack window begins in 72 hours. 72 hours, 3 days to identify all the conspirators, understand the full scope of the plot, and stop it." Sarah felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. "Officer Collins," Dawson said, "Max has been invaluable in identifying the chemical signature, but we need to move faster. There are hundreds of potential targets, government employees who had contact with Kellerman or the other suspects. Can Max handle a larger-scale screening?" Sarah looked down at her partner. Max's eyes were half-closed, his flanks rising and falling with deep, tired breaths. He'd already worked harder today than any single shift in his entire career. "He can," Sarah said, "but he'll need rest first. 8 hours minimum. His detection capabilities decrease with fatigue. We don't have 8 hours. With all respect, ma'am, a fatigued dog makes mistakes. If you want Max at his best, he needs rest." "So do I." Dawson's jaw tightened, but she nodded. 6 hours, but I need you both ready to go at 600. They were given quarters in a secure facility adjacent to CIA headquarters, a small, windowless room with a bed, a bathroom, and nothing else. It was designed for agents who needed to sleep on site during critical operations. Sarah collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, Max jumping up beside her despite the "no dogs on furniture" rule. She was too exhausted to care. Her mind spun with everything she'd seen, everything she'd learned. James Kellerman, a man who had served his country for 25 years, had betrayed everything he'd sworn to protect. How did someone make that choice? What promise of money or power or ideology could convince someone to commit treason on that scale? Max shifted beside her, his head resting on her chest. His weight was comforting, familiar. In this strange place, surrounded by suspicion and betrayal, he was the only thing she could trust completely. "What did we get ourselves into, boy?" she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. Max's tail thumped once against the bed. Whatever it was, they'd face it together. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Captain Morrison in Atlanta. "Heard you're doing important work. Proud of you, Collins. Stay safe." The message brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Atlanta felt like a different world, a simpler world, where the bad guys were drug dealers and the good guys wore badges and everything was relatively clear-cut. Here, nothing was clear. Enemies wore suits and worked in offices and had security clearances. They smiled and shook hands, and all the while planned the destruction of the country they'd sworn to serve. Sarah set an alarm for 5:45, giving them 15 minutes to wake up and prepare before reporting back to Dawson. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep despite the anxiety churning in her gut. She dreamed of shadows and transmitters and Kellerman's pale face as he sat in that interrogation room. She dreamed of Max barking, alerting, warning her of dangers she couldn't see. When the alarm went off, she felt like she'd barely slept at all. But Max was already awake, stretching and yawning, ready for another day of work. She envied his ability to focus on the present moment, to not worry about what came next. In the bathroom, Sarah splashed cold water on her face and tried to make herself presentable. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair was escaping from its bun, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked like someone who'd been working all night, which was accurate. At 0600 sharp, she and Max reported to the operations center. The room was packed with agents and analysts, everyone moving with urgent purpose. Multiple screens showed surveillance footage, organizational charts, maps marked with locations. Dawson looked like she hadn't slept at all. "Officer Collins, we've identified 73 individuals who need to be screened. They're being brought in under the guise of a mandatory security recertification. You and Max will screen each one." 73 people. It would take hours, even working efficiently. Sarah's back already ached at the thought. "We'll start in 30 minutes, Dawson continued. "The screening area is set up in Building B. We'll bring them through one at a time." As Sarah and Max walked to Building B, she noticed the increased security presence. Armed guards at every checkpoint, roving patrols, security cameras, tracking their every move. The entire facility was on lockdown. The screening area was a long corridor with chairs along one wall. It reminded Sarah of a doctor's waiting room, except the patients here were intelligence professionals who had no idea they were suspects in a treason investigation. The first person brought in was a middle-aged man in a grey suit, carrying a coffee mug and looking annoyed at the inconvenience. Sarah put him at ease with a professional smile as Max performed the screening. Clear, then the next. Clear, and the next. Clear. 2 hours in, they'd screened 30 people. Sarah's legs ached from standing, and Max's attention was beginning to waver slightly. She gave him a break, letting him drink water and rest for 10 minutes while the next batch of subjects was prepared. "How's he holding up?" Reed asked, appearing with a sandwich and bottled water for Sarah. "He's tired, but he'll keep going," Sarah said, accepting the food gratefully. "Any breaks in the investigation?" Reed's expression darkened. "Kellerman's still not talking, but we cracked more of his encrypted files. There's a meeting scheduled somewhere in D.C. within the next 48 hours, multiple cell members. We think it's their final coordination before the attacks." "Do you know where?" "Not yet. The location is referenced by a code phrase we haven't decrypted, but if we can identify all the conspirators, We can track them to the meeting. Sarah took a bite of the sandwich, barely tasting it. Everything was happening so fast, the stakes climbing higher with every hour. They returned to screening. Person after person passed through, and Max cleared each one. Sarah was beginning to think they'd reached the end when subject number 68 walked in. Dr. Martin Voss, according to his badge, a technical specialist in signals intelligence, late 40s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his badge lanyard. Max's reaction was immediate and intense. His hackles rose, his body went rigid, and he pulled against Sarah's lead, trying to get closer to Voss. The man's eyes widened. What's wrong with the dog? Dr. Voss, please remain still, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. I don't understand. I haven't done anything. Max barked, the sound sharp and accusatory. Voss took a step backward, and instantly 2 agents moved to block the exits. Dr. Voss, Reed said, appearing beside Sarah, we're going to need you to come with us. The man's face went white, then red. This is a mistake. I'm being set up. Kellerman, he threatened me. He said if I didn't... He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd said too much. Reed's eyes glittered. If you didn't what, Doctor? Voss's mouth worked silently. Then, his shoulders sagging in defeat, he whispered, if I didn't help him, he'd expose my past. Things I did years ago, before I came to the agency. What did you help him with? Technical support, the transmitters, the encryption protocols. Voss's voice broke. I didn't want to betray my country. You have to believe me. He forced me. Save it for the interrogation, Reed said coldly, nodding to the other agents. As Voss was led away, Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and sorrow. They'd found another conspirator, which brought them closer to stopping the attacks. But Voss's desperate confession revealed how the network operated, through blackmail, coercion, exploiting weaknesses. How many others had been forced into cooperation? How many were true believers versus reluctant participants? Max pressed against her leg, seeking comfort after the intense encounter. Sarah knelt and hugged him, feeling his solid warmth, his steady heartbeat. Good boy, she whispered fiercely. You're such a good boy. They had 5 more subjects to screen. Sarah forced herself to focus, to give each person the same careful attention. But her mind kept drifting to Voss's broken expression, his claims of coercion. When the final person was cleared, Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. 73 screenings in 4 hours. Max had performed flawlessly, identifying 2 more individuals who carried trace evidence of the network's chemical signature. You did extraordinary work today, Dawson said, meeting them as they returned to the operations center. Because of Max, we've identified 9 compromised individuals. We're close to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. What happens now? Sarah asked. Dawson's smile was cold and hard. Now we make them tell us everything, and then we stop this attack before it begins. The breakthrough came at 0300 hours, when Dr. Martin Voss finally broke completely. Sarah watched through the glass as the technical specialist sobbed, his face in his hands, spilling everything he knew about the network's operation. The meeting is at a warehouse in Anacostia, Voss said, his voice raw. Tomorrow night at midnight. That's where they'll finalize the attack coordinates and distribute the activation codes. The FBI agent leaning over the table didn't show any emotion. How many people will be there? I don't know exactly. Kellerman said at least 12, maybe more. Voss wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. They're compartmentalized. Most of us only know 1 or 2 others in the network. What are the targets? Voss's face crumpled again. Power grids, water treatment facilities, emergency communication systems. They want to create chaos, make it impossible for federal response to coordinate. Then the network will execute secondary attacks while everyone's scrambling in the dark. Sarah felt her blood run cold. It wasn't just an attack. It was a systematic dismantling of critical infrastructure. Thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people could die in the resulting chaos. Chief Dawson, standing beside Sarah in the observation room, was speaking rapidly into her phone. Yes, sir, we have confirmation. Anacostia Warehouse District, tomorrow night at 2400 hours. We'll need FBI hostage rescue team, CIA special activities, and full tactical support. Reed appeared at Sarah's elbow, looking grimmer than she'd ever seen him. We're coordinating a joint operation. CIA and FBI will handle the raid. But we need Max there. Sarah's head snapped toward him. Sir, there could be explosives, chemical weapons. Who knows what else stored in that location? Max is the only detection asset we have that's proven reliable against the network's equipment. Reed's eyes were apologetic but firm. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but we need you both. Sarah looked down at Max, who had been dozing at her feet. The dog's eyes opened at the sound of his name, his tail giving a sleepy wag. He had no idea what was being asked of him, that he'd be walking into what could be the most dangerous situation of his life. We'll do it, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Whatever you need. The next 20 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah and Max were issued tactical gear, ballistic vests fitted specifically for Max's build, with attachment points for a camera and communication equipment. Sarah received body armor that felt heavy and foreign compared to her regular uniform, plus a tactical helmet with integrated communication systems. You'll be positioned with the second wave, explained Agent Torres, who was coordinating Sarah's role in the operation. First wave secures the perimeter and makes entry. Once the location is declared secure, you and Max go in to sweep for devices, explosives, or any chemical signatures. What if it's not secure? Sarah asked. Torres met her eyes levelly. Then you wait until it is. We're not sending you into active gunfire, Officer Collins. Your job is detection, not combat. But Sarah knew how quickly situations could deteriorate. Plans rarely survived first contact with reality. They reviewed blueprints of the warehouse district, a maze of old industrial buildings near the Anacostia River, many abandoned or operating with skeleton crews. The specific warehouse in question belonged to a shell company with ties to Eastern European interests. It had been under surveillance for 6 hours, with multiple individuals matching profiles of suspected network operatives spotted entering but not leaving. They're already gathering, Reed said, pointing to surveillance photos. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. This raid is our only chance to stop it. Sarah studied the faces in the photographs. Some were people she'd screened with Max, people who had passed through the CIA screening and been cleared. Others were strangers. Harder faces with the look of professional operatives. One photograph made her pause. A woman in her 30s with sharp features and cold eyes entering the warehouse carrying what looked like an equipment case. Who is this? Sarah asked. Reed checked the file. Marina Volkov, former Russian FSB, suspected of freelancing for various criminal and terrorist organizations. If she's involved, this is serious. Volkov specializes in electronic warfare and infrastructure sabotage. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a sophisticated, well-funded operation that had been years in the making. And tomorrow night, they would attempt to dismantle it in a single operation. Sarah tried to sleep that afternoon, but managed only a few fitful hours. Her dreams were full of explosions and shadows, of Max barking warnings she couldn't understand. When she woke, her heart was racing, her uniform soaked with sweat. Max was sitting beside the bed, watching her with concerned eyes. He pressed his cold nose against her hand, his own way of offering comfort. "I know, boy," Sarah whispered. "I'm scared too." At 2200 hours, the strike force assembled in a staging area 3 blocks from the target warehouse. Sarah counted at least 50 personnel, FBI hostage rescue team members in black tactical gear, CIA special activities officers, bomb technicians, medics, and a small army of support staff. She felt profoundly out of place in her Atlanta PD tactical gear among these elite operators. But when several of the HRT members approached to meet Max, greeting the dog with professional respect and genuine affection, she felt slightly better. Working dogs transcended jurisdictional boundaries. Everyone understood their value. The operation commander, FBI Special Agent Marcus Blackwell, gathered the team leaders for a final briefing. Sarah and Max were positioned near the back, but she could see the tactical display showing the warehouse layout. "We have 17 confirmed individuals inside," Blackwell said, his voice clipped and professional. "Unknown number of weapons, unknown defensive preparations. We go in fast and hard, simultaneous entry from 4 points. Rules of engagement are weapons-free if fired upon, but we want prisoners for interrogation if possible." He looked directly at Sarah. "Officer Collins, you and your K9 partner will enter with the third wave after initial clearance. Your job is to identify any explosive devices, chemical weapons, or technical equipment that needs to be secured. Stay behind the tactical teams at all times. Clear?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. At 23:45 hours, they moved into position. Sarah and Max were assigned to Team 3, which would enter through the east loading dock after Teams 1 and 2 breached the main entrances. The night was humid and still, the air thick with the smell of the river and old industrial machinery. Max was tense but focused, his training overriding any nervousness. Sarah kept her hand on his vest, feeling his muscles coiled and ready beneath her fingers. They'd worked together for 6 years, but never anything like this. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard the countdown. All teams, 30 seconds. Her mouth was dry. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 20 seconds, 15, 10. Execute, execute, execute. The night exploded with noise. Flashbangs detonated, doors burst open, voices shouted commands. Through the chaos, Sarah heard gunfire, sharp cracks that made her flinch despite her training. "Shots fired, south entrance, multiple hostiles engaging. Team 2, we have runners heading to the north exit. Suspect down, need medical." Sarah pressed against the wall beside the loading dock, Max tight against her leg. Every instinct screamed to run, to get away from the violence erupting inside that warehouse. But she held her position, waiting for the all clear. Minutes passed like hours, more gunfire, more shouting. Then gradually, the chaos began to resolve into order. "South section secure, 3 suspects in custody, 2 wounded. North section secure, 4 suspects in custody. Central area, wait, we have a barricaded position. Northeast corner, 2nd floor, at least 3 hostiles, possibly more." Sarah's earpiece crackled. "Team 3, hold position. We have a standoff situation." Through the loading dock door, Sarah could hear voices shouting in English and what sounded like Russian. The tactical teams were trying to negotiate, but the responses were defiant, angry. Then a new voice came through the radio, calm, cold, and chillingly familiar from the briefing photos. Marina Volkov. "You think you've won? You've stopped nothing. The network is everywhere. Even if you kill us all, others will complete the mission." "Ma'am, we have the building surrounded," Blackwell's voice responded. "There's no escape. Surrender now and you'll be treated fairly." Volkov's laugh was harsh. "Fair? Like you treated Kellerman? We know he's been broken, that he told you everything. It doesn't matter. The plan is already in motion." Sarah felt ice in her veins. Already in motion. Before anyone could respond, there was a massive explosion from inside the warehouse. The shockwave blew out windows, sending glass and debris flying. Sarah threw herself over Max, shielding him with her body as fragments rained down around them. "All teams report. Team 1, we're okay, but the northeast corner just went up. Team 2, we have casualties. Need medical." Through the smoke and chaos, Sarah heard Torres shouting, "Collins, we need Max now. There could be more explosives." Every instinct told Sarah to stay put, to wait for the dust to settle. But people were injured in there, possibly dying. And if there were more bombs... "Max, Beimir!" she commanded, and together they moved through the loading dock entrance. The interior of the warehouse was a nightmare of smoke, debris, and emergency lighting. The explosion had torn through the northeast corner, leaving a gaping hole in the 2nd floor. Tactical teams were regrouping, medics attending to wounded operators. "Over here!" Torres waved them toward the central area of the warehouse. "We found equipment cases. We need to know if they're rigged." Sarah's heart was in her throat as they approached. 3 large equipment cases sat on a folding table, their contents unknown. Max's nose went to work immediately, his nostrils flaring as he processed the complex cocktail of scents. He alerted within seconds, sitting sharply, his eyes locked on the middle case. "That one," Sarah said, pointing. "Possible explosive." The bomb tech approached carefully, using portable X-ray equipment to scan the case. "She's right. I've got wiring and what looks like C4, sophisticated trigger mechanism. Can you disarm it? Give me 20 minutes. But they didn't have 20 minutes. From somewhere in the building came the sound of more gunfire, and Volkov's voice rang out again, this time without electronic amplification. "You want to know where the other bombs are? Scattered across the city, water treatment plant in Alexandria, power substation in Arlington, emergency operations center in Silver Spring, all set to detonate at 200 hours. That gives you—" There was a pause, probably while she checked a watch. 97 minutes. Blackwell's voice was urgent in Sarah's earpiece. "Someone get a location on that voice, and get me bomb disposal teams to those locations now." But Sarah was focused on something else. Max had started moving, his nose working frantically. He wasn't following commands anymore. He was tracking something urgent, something his training told him was critically important. "Max, higher," Sarah commanded, but the dog ignored her, moving deeper into the warehouse. "Collins, maintain control of your dog," Torres shouted, but Sarah understood. Max had detected something, and his drive to alert was overriding even his discipline. She followed, trusting him completely. Max led her through the debris, past tactical teams clearing rooms, toward a section of the warehouse that seemed empty. Old shipping containers lined the walls, most rusted and ancient. Max's attention fixed on one container, his body rigid with alertness. "Here," Sarah called. "Max is alerting on this container." Torres and 2 tactical operators joined her. "Get it open!" The container doors were locked, but bolt cutters made quick work of it. As the doors swung open, Sarah's breath caught. Inside were dozens of devices, sleek, modern, clearly sophisticated technology. Some were partially assembled, others completed and ready for deployment. And on a laptop sitting on a makeshift desk, a map of Washington, D.C. glowed with dozens of red markers. "My God," Torres whispered, "these are all target locations." There had to be 50 markers on that map, not just the 3 Volkov had mentioned, 50 separate targets across the capital region. Power stations, water facilities, communications hubs, hospitals, schools, government buildings. A comprehensive assault designed to create maximum chaos. Sarah felt sick if even half of these devices had already been deployed. "We need this laptop secured and analyzed immediately," Torres barked into her radio. "And someone get me a connection to Director Hartley. We need to start evacuating these locations now." But even as she spoke, they heard the sound of helicopters approaching. Not theirs, the distinctive sound of civilian news helicopters, drawn by the explosions and law enforcement presence. "How did the media get here so fast?" someone asked. The answer came from Blackwell over the radio, his voice tight with fury. "Because this was always part of the plan. Create a spectacle, draw emergency resources to this location while the real attacks happen elsewhere. It's a diversion." Sarah's stomach plummeted. They'd been played. While dozens of federal agents focused on this warehouse raid, the network's operatives were free to position devices across the city. Max barked sharply, pulling Sarah's attention back to the container. He'd moved to the far corner, alerting on something else. Sarah followed his gaze and saw it, a digital timer attached to what looked like enough C4 to level the entire warehouse. The timer read 08:47, 8 minutes and 47 seconds. "Bomb!" Sarah shouted. "We have a bomb!" The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as the bomb disposal tech rushed over. He took one look at the device and his face went pale. "This is sophisticated, military grade. The timer is connected to a radio trigger. If I try to disarm it prematurely, it could detonate. I need to trace the circuit first." "How long?" Blackwell demanded. "Longer than 8 minutes." The decision was instant. "All personnel evacuate. Get out now." The warehouse became a river of moving bodies as operators, agents, and support staff rushed toward the exits. Sarah grabbed Max's vest and ran, her boots pounding against concrete as the timer counted down in her mind. They burst through the loading dock entrance with 4 minutes remaining. The staging area was a controlled chaos of evacuation, vehicles starting, personnel accounting for team members, the wounded being loaded into ambulances. "Everyone back! Minimum 500 yards!" Blackwell was shouting. "Move, move, move!" Sarah and Max ran with the crowd, putting distance between themselves and the warehouse. She counted down in her head. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. At 30 seconds, everyone dropped behind vehicles, buildings, anything that might provide cover. The explosion was massive. Sarah felt the shockwave roll over them like a physical force, the sound deafening even at this distance. The warehouse became a fireball, debris shooting into the night sky, glass shattering in buildings blocks away. When Sarah raised her head, the warehouse was simply gone, replaced by a burning crater. If they'd still been inside. "Everyone okay?" Blackwell was doing a head count, but Sarah could barely hear him over the ringing in her ears. Max pressed against her, trembling slightly. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. "It's okay, boy. We made it. We're okay." But they weren't okay. Not really, because 50 bombs were still out there, scattered across Washington, D.C., and they had less than 90 minutes to find them all. Torres appeared, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes fierce. "Collins, we need Max. The laptop survived. We have the locations, but we don't know which devices are already armed and which are still being positioned. We need to sweep the priority targets." Sarah looked down at Max. The dog was exhausted, stressed, pushed beyond anything he'd ever experienced. But his eyes were clear, focused. He was ready to keep going. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked. "The Alexandria water treatment plant. It serves 2 million people. If that bomb goes off..." Sarah didn't need her to finish the sentence. She stood, her legs shaky but holding. "Let's go." They were loaded into a helicopter within minutes. Sarah, Max, Torres, and a bomb disposal team. As they lifted off, Sarah could see the burning remains of the warehouse below, fire trucks and emergency vehicles converging on the scene. The helicopter raced through the night sky toward Alexandria, and Sarah checked her watch. 1 hour and 17 minutes until detonation. They had to find the bomb, disarm it, and then move to the next target. And the next, and the next. It was impossible, but they had to try. Max pressed his head against her leg as the helicopter banked hard, the lights of the city spreading out below them. Sarah stroked his fur, drawing strength from his presence. "Just a little longer, boy," she whispered. "I know you're tired, but people need us. Can you do this?" Max's tail thumped once against the helicopter floor. Yes. The water treatment plant loomed ahead, its industrial structures silhouetted against the night sky. They were racing against a clock that showed no mercy, hunting invisible bombs that could kill thousands. But Sarah and Max had never failed a mission. Not once. In 6 years. They weren't about to start now. The helicopter touched down on the helipad at Alexandria Water Treatment Facility at 2:47 hours. Sarah and Max were moving before the skids fully settled, ducking under the rotor wash as they ran toward the plant's main building. Torres and the bomb disposal team followed close behind. A facility manager met them at the entrance, his face pale with fear. "We've evacuated all non-essential personnel, but shutting down the water treatment process takes time. We still have 12 operators inside, maintaining critical systems." "Where would someone hide a bomb?" Torres demanded. "There are hundreds of locations, pump rooms, filtration systems, chemical storage, maintenance tunnels." "We'll start with the chemical storage," Torres decided. "Maximum damage potential." They moved quickly through the facility, Max's nose working overtime as they navigated through industrial machinery and miles of piping. The air was thick with the smell of chlorine and other treatment chemicals, potentially overwhelming for a detection dog. But Max had been trained to filter through competing scents, to find the specific signature he was hunting. in the main chemical storage room, surrounded by massive tanks of chlorine and other treatment agents. Max alerted. His body went rigid, nose pointing toward a ventilation shaft near the ceiling. "There!" Sarah called. The bomb tech climbed up on a maintenance ladder, carefully examining the shaft with a tactical light. "Got it. Sophisticated placement. If this detonates, it'll rupture the chlorine tanks. The explosion alone would be devastating, but the chlorine release would create a toxic cloud that could kill everyone in a 3-mile radius." Sarah felt sick. Marina Volkov hadn't been exaggerating. These weren't just bombs. They were weapons of mass destruction designed to maximize civilian casualties. "Can you disarm it?" Torres asked urgently. The tech was already working, his hands steady despite the pressure. "It's got a dual trigger, timer and remote detonation. I need to isolate both systems without triggering a tamper switch. Give me 15 minutes. They didn't have 15 minutes. Sarah checked her watch. 052 hours. 1 hour and 8 minutes until the coordinated detonation. "We have 6 more priority targets to sweep," Torres said quietly, her face grim. "We can't wait here." Sarah's heart tore in 2 directions. Staying meant potentially watching helplessly as other bombs detonated across the city. Leaving meant abandoning this tech to work alone, with no backup if something went wrong. But Max made the decision for them. The dog was already moving toward the exit, his nose working, telling her there was more to find. They'd done their job here, detected the device. Now they needed to find the others. "Call us when it's clear," Sarah told the tech, "and be careful." They were back in the helicopter within 5 minutes, racing toward the next target, a power substation in Arlington that supplied electricity to most of Northern Virginia. As they flew, Sarah's radio crackled with reports from other teams across the city. "Device found and disarmed at Silver Spring Emergency Operations Center. Still searching at the Pentagon secondary facility. We have a device at Roosevelt High School. Bomb tech is working on it now." A high school. Sarah felt fury rising through her exhaustion. What kind of monsters planted bombs at schools? The Arlington substation was a maze of transformers, power lines, and electrical equipment. Max led them directly to a control building where a device had been placed near the main circuit breakers. This bomb disposal tech worked faster, recognizing the same configuration as the previous devices. 12 minutes to disarm. They moved to the next target. Then the next. Each location became a blur of running, searching, Max alerting, bomb techs working frantically against the clock. Sarah's legs burned, her lungs ached, but she kept moving. Max was flagging too. She could see it in the slight delay in his responses, the way his tongue lolled with exhaustion. But he never stopped working, never gave up. At 0:37 hours, they'd found and cleared 7 devices. 13 more remained on the priority list, and they had 23 minutes. "We're not going to make it," Torres said quietly, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Even if we find them all, there's not enough time to disarm them." Sarah's radio crackled. It was Agent Reed, still coordinating from the command center. "We've traced the remote detonation signal. It's broadcasting from a location in Georgetown, a townhouse registered to a shell company. We're sending a team now, but if we can capture the detonation controller, we might be able to prevent the coordinated attack." "How certain are you?" Torres demanded. 70%, maybe less, but it's the best option we have." Torres looked at Sarah, then at Max. "Your call, Officer Collins. We can keep searching for bombs, or we can go after the detonation controller." Sarah's mind raced. 7 bombs disarmed. 43 still active, scattered across the city. If they kept searching, they might find a few more, but if they went after the controller and succeeded, they could potentially stop all of them. She looked down at Max. The dog's dark eyes met hers, filled with trust and exhaustion. He would do whatever she asked, go wherever she led. The decision was hers. "Georgetown," Sarah said. "We go after the controller." The helicopter banked hard, heading toward the upscale Georgetown neighborhood. Sarah's stomach churned with doubt. What if she was wrong? What if the detonation signal wasn't really there? What if they were wasting precious minutes that could be spent finding more bombs? But she'd learned to trust her instincts, the same way Max trusted his nose. And every instinct told her this was the right move. The townhouse was located on a quiet residential street, lined with expensive homes and luxury cars. It looked utterly ordinary. Brick facade, well-maintained garden, lights visible in the windows. Nothing suggested it was a terrorist command center. The tactical team was already in position when Sarah's helicopter landed 2 blocks away. She and Max ran to join them, her body armor feeling heavier with each step. "We've confirmed movement inside," the tactical team leader briefed them. "At least 2 individuals, possibly more. Unknown if they're armed. We breach in 3 minutes. Sarah positioned herself with Max 30 feet back from the entry point, as she'd been instructed. This time her role was clear. Once the location was secured, she and Max would sweep for the detonation controller and any other devices. The seconds ticked down. Sarah watched the tactical team stack up beside the door, their movements precise and practiced. She checked her watch. 0154 hours, 6 minutes. Breach, breach, breach. The door exploded inward, flashbangs detonated, and the team poured inside. Sarah heard shouting, the sounds of struggle, but no gunfire. 30 seconds later, the all-clear came. 2 suspects in custody, location secure. Sarah and Max entered the townhouse. The interior was surprisingly normal. Expensive furniture, artwork on the walls, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. But in the upstairs office, they found what they were looking for. A sophisticated communications setup with multiple laptops, encrypted radio equipment and, sitting on the desk like something from a spy movie, a metal briefcase with a complex control panel, the detonation controller. Marina Volkov sat handcuffed in a chair, blood trickling from a cut above her eye where she'd resisted arrest, her cold eyes fixed on Sarah with pure hatred. "Too late," Volkov said, her accent thick with contempt. "The signal is automated. Even if you have the controller, you can't stop what's coming." The bomb tech was already examining the device, his face growing paler by the second. "She's right. This is just a relay. The actual detonation signal is being broadcast from somewhere else. This just amplifies and distributes it to all the devices." "Where?" Torres demanded, spinning on Volkov. "Where's the primary transmitter?" Volkov smiled, showing bloody teeth. "You'll never find it in time." Sarah's watch read 0156. 4 minutes. Her mind raced desperately. A primary transmitter, powerful enough to send coordinated signals to dozens of devices across a major city. It would need significant power, an elevated position, clear line of sight. Max barked sharply, pulling at his lead. Sarah had been so focused on the controller that she'd forgotten to give him the search command. Now the dog was alerting on something, his nose pointing toward the window. Sarah followed his gaze. Through the window, she could see the distinctive silhouette of the Key Bridge, and beyond it, the Georgetown University campus rising on the hill. Specifically, the campus communications tower, a tall structure that would have perfect coverage of the entire D.C. area. "The University Tower," Sarah said, the certainty hitting her like lightning. "The primary transmitter is on the University Communications Tower." Torres was already on the radio. "All units, we need immediate access to Georgetown University Communications Tower. This is a national security emergency." But Sarah checked her watch again. 0157. 3 minutes to reach the tower, locate the transmitter, and disarm it. Impossible. Unless they didn't disarm it, unless they just destroyed it. "Get me a sniper with a .50 caliber rifle," Sarah said urgently. "High explosive rounds. We don't need to disarm the transmitter. We just need to destroy it before it sends the detonation signal." Torres's eyes widened with understanding. She grabbed her radio. "Command, I need a sniper team with heavy ordnance at the Georgetown Tower, immediately." "Negative," came the response. "Closest team is 8 minutes out." 8 minutes. They had 3. Sarah's mind worked frantically. Then she remembered the helicopter that brought them here. It was parked 2 blocks away, And it was a federal law enforcement helicopter, which meant the helicopter has weapons mounts, Sarah said. M240 machine gun, if it's the standard configuration. That could destroy the transmitter if we get close enough. Torres stared at her. You want to shoot a university communications tower from a helicopter in the middle of Georgetown. Do you have a better idea? They ran. Sarah had never run so fast in her life, Max racing beside her, their boots pounding against the pavement. Behind them she could hear Torres shouting into her radio, coordinating with the helicopter pilot. They reached the helicopter at 01:58. The pilot was already spinning up the rotors, understanding the urgency. Sarah and Max threw themselves inside, and Torres jumped in behind them. "Can you hit that tower?" Torres shouted over the rotor noise. The pilot, a hard-faced woman with grey in her hair, nodded grimly. "Get on the gun. I'll get you close." Torres moved to the helicopter's side door where the M240 machine gun was mounted. She'd clearly done this before. Her movements were practiced, confident. Sarah strapped herself and Max into crash seats as the helicopter lifted off. They climbed rapidly, the Georgetown skyline spreading out before them. The university tower was easy to spot, a red and white striped structure rising above the campus buildings, and near the top, Sarah could see something that didn't belong, a dark shape attached to the tower's communications array, the transmitter. "I've got visual on the device," the pilot called, "making my approach." The helicopter banked hard, angling toward the tower. Sarah checked her watch. 0159, 1 minute, 60 seconds. "Range," Torres called. 300 yards, closing." "Not close enough. I need 200. The helicopter pushed forward, fighting crosswinds from the Potomac. Sarah could see the university campus below, students visible in the lighted windows, completely unaware of the drama unfolding above them. 250 yards, the pilot called. "Closer." "I'm at the limit of safe approach. Any closer and the rotor wash could destabilize us." Torres's jaw set. "Then hold her steady." Sarah watched Torres sight down the machine gun. Her body braced against the weapon. The helicopter was vibrating, swaying slightly in the wind. It was an almost impossible shot, hitting a small device on a tower from a moving helicopter at 250 yards. Sarah glanced at her watch. 0159:45. 15 seconds. Torres fired. The machine gun roared, tracers arcing through the night toward the tower. The first burst went wide, sparking off the tower's metal framework. 10 seconds. Torres adjusted, fired again. Closer, but still not hitting the device. 5 seconds. "Please," Sarah whispered, clutching Max tight. "Please." Torres fired a third burst, and Sarah saw it. One of the rounds impacted directly on the dark shape attached to the tower. The device exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. Sarah's watch clicked to 0200. Nothing happened. The city remained lit. No explosions echoed across the landscape. The bombs, deprived of their detonation signal, sat dormant in their various locations. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky exhale, her entire body trembling with released tension. Max whined softly, sensing her emotion, and she hugged him fiercely. "We did it," Torres said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "We actually did it." The helicopter turned back toward the Georgetown landing zone, and Sarah could see emergency vehicles converging on the tower location. The bomb disposal teams would collect the destroyed transmitter, analyze it, use it to track down any remaining network operatives. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd stopped the attack. The next hours passed in the exhausted haze. Sarah and Max were debriefed, checked by medics, debriefed again. The scope of what they'd prevented slowly became clear. 43 active bombs, enough to have killed thousands and plunged the entire D.C. region into chaos. Kellerman, Volkov, and 7 other network operatives were in federal custody. More arrests were being made as investigators traced connections and communications. The conspiracy was unraveling completely. At 0800 hours, after 26 hours without real sleep, Sarah was finally told she could rest. A room had been prepared for her and Max at a secure federal facility. She could barely keep her eyes open as she walked there, Max plodding beside her with equal exhaustion. But before they could reach the room, Chief Dawson intercepted them. "Officer Collins, one more thing before you rest. The President wants to see you now." Sarah's exhausted brain struggled to process this. Now, but it'll be brief. He understands you need rest. 10 minutes later, Sarah found herself back in the Oval Office, feeling like she was living in a surreal dream. Max sat beside her, his head drooping with tiredness despite his training. President Morrison entered, and this time his expression was different, not just grateful, but awed. "Officer Collins," he said quietly, "what you and Max did last night saved this city, possibly saved this country. Intelligence estimates suggest that if those attacks had succeeded, we would have been facing the worst domestic terror incident in our history." Sarah wanted to say something appropriately modest, but her exhausted brain could only manage. "Max did most of the work, sir." The President smiled. "I've been briefed on everything. The White House meeting, the warehouse raid, the bomb locations, the tower shot. You made decisions that no one else could have made. You trusted your partner when everyone else would have doubted." He knelt down again as he had before, looking Max in the eyes. This remarkable dog detected a traitor in a room full of the most powerful people in the country. He found bombs that would have killed thousands. He never stopped working even when exhausted beyond measure. The President reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and gleaming. It was a medal, specifically the Public Safety Officer Medal of Valor, one of the highest civilian honors for law enforcement. "This is for you, Max," the President said softly, attaching the medal to Max's tactical vest. "For courage above and beyond the call of duty, for saving lives through dedication and trust." Max's tail wagged slowly, and he licked the President's hand. The gesture was so simple, so perfectly Max, that Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. The President stood and produced a second medal. "And this is for you, Officer Collins, for leadership, courage and faith in your partner when everything was on the line." As the President attached the medal to Sarah's uniform, she finally let herself feel it. The weight of what they'd accomplished, the lives they'd saved, the disaster they'd prevented. "Thank you, Mr. President," she whispered. "No, Officer Collins, thank you, both of you." Finally, mercifully, they were allowed to rest. Sarah collapsed onto the bed in the secure room, Max jumping up beside her despite protocol. She was too tired to care, too tired to do anything but wrap her arms around her partner. "We did it, boy," she murmured into his fur. "I don't know how, but we did it." Max's response was a soft snore. He was already asleep. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Captain Morrison in Atlanta. "Just got word about what you've been doing. No details, but enough to know you're a hero. Atlanta PD is proud of you, Collins. Come home safe. Home." Atlanta felt like a lifetime ago, a different world where the stakes were smaller and the threats were more straightforward. But it was her world, her city, her job. And in 48 hours, after the debriefings were finished and the medal ceremonies were done and the classified reports were filed, she and Max would return to it. They'd go back to being a local K9 unit, working drug cases and tracking suspects and maintaining order in their small corner of the world. But Sarah knew she'd never see that work the same way again. She'd learned that threats could come from anywhere, that betrayal could hide behind the most trusted faces, that the partnership between a handler and her dog could literally change the course of history. Most importantly, she'd learned what she'd always suspected but now knew with absolute certainty. Max was never wrong. Not about drugs, not about explosives, not about people. His nose didn't lie. His instincts didn't fail. When he'd alerted on James Kellerman in that White House corridor, Sarah had trusted him despite every logical reason not to. That trust had saved thousands of lives. "I'll always trust you," Sarah whispered to the sleeping dog. "No matter what, no matter who. You and me, partner. Always." Max's ear twitched in his sleep, the only acknowledgement he could give. But Sarah knew he understood. 6 years of partnership, of working together, of saving lives and solving cases. That bond went beyond words, beyond commands, beyond anything that could be explained to someone who'd never experienced it. It was trust, pure, complete, unshakable trust. The kind of trust that saved nations. Sarah's eyes finally closed, exhaustion claiming her. Her last conscious thought was of Max's steady breathing beside her, the rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his presence. They'd been through hell together. They'd faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. And tomorrow they'd do it all again, because that was the job, that was the calling, that was who they were. Officer and dog, handler and partner, human and animal. But more than any of that, friends. True friends, bound by something deeper than words could express. Sarah Collins and Max, K9 Unit 7, Atlanta Police Department, heroes who had saved a nation and asked for nothing in return except the chance to keep working together. In the days that followed, as the story slowly became public in carefully controlled releases, people would talk about the incredible dog who detected a traitor. They'd marvel at the technology, the training, the dramatic helicopter shot that destroyed the transmitter. But Sarah knew the real story was simpler and more profound than any headline could capture. It was about trust, the kind of trust that lets you bet everything on a dog's nose, that lets you make impossible decisions with confidence, that lets you face overwhelming danger because you know your partner has your back. That trust had saved thousands of lives. That trust had exposed a conspiracy at the highest levels of government. That trust had prevented a national catastrophe. And that trust, Sarah knew with absolute certainty, would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Because Max was never wrong, and Sarah would always trust him. Always.